just I think as you start out in wholesaling, you run into people. A lot of them are at pivot points in their life where a lot of things have not gone their way, or where some major events happen. I had a home that we contracted out that the owner called me and couldn't really talk too much, and it took about 3 conversations till I was able to get the whole story. He was a landlord, went into his house. There was a squatter. He told the squatter to leave. He woke up in an ambulance screaming because the guy knocked him out, doused him with gasoline, caught him on fire, and walked out of the house. And the neighbor came and got him. And so he was like laying in a hospital bed, like half his body burned. And he was just like, I just don't want to go back to the house. So I'm just selling it so I don't have to see it again. And I mean, there's people you're going to run into they're going to be like, it's a constant game of one up. So that's kind of one of them. There's multiple where it's just people have had like life and death experiences inside of a property, and they just don't want to deal with that property ever again. So, and you'll run into it at some point.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Invest Iowa. Today I have Derek with me. We're going to talk about Sub2 creative finance, how to get properties at fair value and value add properties, wholesale, a little bit of almost everything, not your conventional lending option, and buying homes in the conventional way. So we're going to explore, pick his brain into how he got there and his goals for the future. Thank you so much for coming, Derek.
Yeah, no worries, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. How can we get started? So you were talking about how things didn't go your well at the beginning.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me personally, I got out of the military in 2007, started getting into real estate in 2008, bought a house north of Tucson to do a flip. I finished her up, put it on the market, and it was right when the wave of defaults started happening in California down to Arizona, and all the banks tightened up on the lower credit buyers, out the gate, which were right in the pool of the kind of houses I could afford to flip at the time. So I was right in the middle of like those who their pain became my pain, I guess you'd say. So houses in that area were losing 30% of their value in a matter of weeks. It was a race to the bottom. So I ended up, I think I had it on the market at 150, and I was the lowest priced house on the street, on the block, and ended up selling that house for $1,000 profit. Wow. About 3 weeks later, about a month later. Yeah. So, I at least walked out, but it was a good learning curve to understand, the buying low, where you buy is where you make your money, and to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of how the market's moving. And I had no idea, I was just, if you buy it, you'll make money. And that was kind of like, a guy told me back then, a turkey could fly in a hurricane, right? And he's just like, right now, there's no way you can not make money. I was like, cool, I'll just buy a house and get going.
Yeah.
Not always true.
How old were you when you were doing that?
2008, I was 29.
29?
Yeah. So, okay. Just first time in, dipping my foot in. But that kind of made me gun shy on the whole thing. I didn't want to quit, but it put me in a long-term recovery financially to try to get back out of that, to be honest. And building up, I wanted to build up my knowledge base before I went back at it again. And so I took probably close to 5 to 10 years off, just trying to get back into it with knowledge base. So
trying to figure out what is it that you particularly wanted.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times if you fail at first, depending on the person, I'm very I'm not risk averse, I guess you'd say. I don't care. Like, I'm the kind of guy that'll put my whole life savings on black and roll it, like I always feel like there's always tomorrow to make it back. And so that's not always the best mentality to have, but at the same time, I kind of got that analysis paralysis type of thing going on where I was like, man, do I know enough not to have this happen again? Do I know enough, and then I'd always feel like it stopped me from taking action for quite a while. And
how do you take it back? So 10 years passed, and then how do you get back into real estate?
So I first stumbled into a mentorship, to be honest with you. I I feel like one thing this generation has going for it that we didn't have in mine, this 20-year gap between myself and you guys and, those that are older, is that the flow of information wasn't so free, and that people that are willing to just like be go-givers and help others succeed because there's always money out there to be made, like that mentality was non-existent. I feel that that's a more recent occurrence in our society. And so I joined a mentorship.
What mentorship?
Astro flipping.
Astro flipping.
That's the one I joined originally. It's Jamil Jamji's. I was probably one of the first ones in on that. And my main takeaway on that, it's evolved into what it is today. I think today it's a much tighter community and a much better product. But the one takeaway I had from it was just the free flow of information that was in that group, learning from other students, and I think that the one I'm in now, Sub2, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
I've found that reaching out, if you're the smartest one in the room, you're not in the right room, right? And so I find that that's kind of how you get in among people, that you're not going to be the guy that is always having to give out info because there's nobody else there that can provide you value,
Yeah.
So I would always say, I know a lot of people knock on gurus, and there's a lot of people out there that are charging money for basic info or stuff that's not really, they don't do. But if you can find the right one, it's worth the money to cut your learning curve.
So what's the end goal? Like, for example, with Astro flipping, why did you join this membership? To learn, but what was the end goal besides like learning how to wholesale?
It was part learning how to wholesale. It was just the larger piece of, I wanted to go virtual. I've never really, I'm just going to be honest, I've never really had a strong showing in Des Moines. And so I wanted to learn something that would allow me to go national, to do more virtual wholesaling along those lines. And that was their main selling point. And it's hard enough for some people that just want to learn how to do this, but then to be like, okay, you're going to do this, and the house is in Knoxville, Tennessee, and so that to some people is a daunting idea, even though once you've done some stuff like that, it's not really that big of a deal. But to be around people who have done that, again, I try to surround myself now with people who are who I want to be, or the people who've done what I want to do. Those are the people I'm searching out. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. People that try to go it alone, a lot of times I feel that are too proud or that are too hesitant to ask people for help are the ones that you're just hurting yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big piece. Is
what about Sub2? What about Sub2? How does Sub2 play a role into? You already had a mentorship.
Yeah. So I went into Sub2 because, I'm going to admit also, I have a love-hate relationship with wholesaling, because I do feel that, and there's other wholesalers that will disagree with me, I do feel that at times, it felt to me like taking advantage of people.
Okay.
To be honest, if somebody's older and they've got a house, and you're gonna take that house, and you're like, well, they had a lot of trouble, and I helped solve that problem, and it's like, you did solve their problem, but did you solve their problem more than that $60,000 that you made off of that deal would have helped them? And I know that my wholesaling that I've done, all of my sellers have been people that have it's a second home that they own, or there's just money's not always the answer to people. Sometimes it's a stressor. It's a situation that they're in. There's a lot going on in their life, and that house is just compounding that problem. And the money from that house is not the solution to that problem. The house itself, or the memories that come with that house, or the distance between where they live now and the house. There's a lot of things that can go into why somebody has an issue, and it's not always monetary. And so with Sub2, it allowed me to, the thing I like about Sub2 is that I'm allowed to offer a lot higher price on a home, and just ethically and morally, I feel like when I go into some of these houses where money is the issue, where wholesaling to me might not feel for me personally is the appropriate approach, I can use creative finance a lot of times and solve a financial problem, get the house at a deal for me, and it's more of a win-win situation, I find a lot of times.
Yeah. So give me an example of creative finance. So give me the same example, and how would you go about wholesaling it as a traditional wholesale process, and how you will go about it as a creative finance strategy. So what's the difference?
they don't always fit identically, you know, like a lot of times, almost always when you're trying to do a creative finance for me, and all this, I'm speaking A, as myself, and B, not as a lawyer. So I just want to put that caveat out there.
Right.
You know, so for me, usually if I'm doing a Sub2 deal, or a creative deal, it's because the wholesale didn't work. And that's almost always because it's a money issue. Right. I guess in a way, I can't think of a property where they both would have fit.
Okay, that makes sense.
So like we can go with a wholesale property. So I've done a wholesale property where my very first deal wholesale was an individual down in Kansas City. He owned multiple properties. He had bought multiple properties to flip all at the same time. He had money, and it wasn't that he was in a bind financially. It was that it ended up he lived in another country, was from another country. His mom had a stroke. She needed him there to take care of her. His crews were working on another house. He didn't have time to recruit more crews to do the houses, and he didn't want to wait for his money, so he needed it now. So he was like, if you'll just take this house for what I paid for it, give me my money back, I'll cut you the deed today. So that house ended up, I think it was $18,000 is what I put it under contract for. So I go to this individual, I tell him I have a purchase agreement with him, $18,000. I have 30 days till that deal has to close. I have 30 days to find a buyer. And so we marketed it. And the funny part about that to me is that like there's so much that I overlooked on that deal. It was to the stud, stripped down. We ended up assigning it to an end buyer, another flipper who took it for $30,000. So we made about $12,000 off the deal. But the funny part of that, for me, the seller walked in, he hits me up after he walked through. I'm like, what did you think about it? He's like, yeah, when was the fire? And I didn't even realize
what?
Half the inside of that house was charred black, you know? And I was just so just going through snapping photos, just totally into trying to look like I knew what I was doing.
But you didn't.
No, I didn't, you know? And I kind of knew. I knew the process, but it was the first time I'd been in a house. It's the first time that I had spoken with a seller face to face, you know? So it's kind of like that whole, it's a blur. And then afterwards you're like, what did I screw up? What did I not remember, you know? And, So I signed that house off. A guy paid $30,000 for it. I think he ended up making north of 60 off of that when it was all said and done. But that was a perfect fit. He didn't care about the money so much. He just wanted to get out from under it because he needed to get back home to deal with his mom, and he didn't want to wait 2 months for a conventional sale or for anything like that. So, 15 days was perfect for him.
So that's where wholesale would work.
That was a wholesale deal. Yeah. For a creative finance, my first creative finance deal was also in Kansas City. It's one I use a lot of times for my example. Husband and wife bought a house, got a divorce shortly after, 6 months after, and both had moved on to other individuals, and they were both buying new places to live. So they didn't need the money to buy a new place at the time. They didn't need the money. They had no equity, right? They had just bought the house, and now they got to sell it. There's no way they can sell it through the traditional real estate process.
They'll have to write a check
to the table. They're gonna have to write a check when they come back. So basically, and it's funny because he's the first guy I ever called when I was trying to look for Sub2s.
No
and
way.
I had no idea what I was doing with Sub2s at the time. I just had an example, and that's the other thing I guess I'd have to backtrack to is that it helps when you increase your network and you know people. It's like you can have more confidence when you go in because I've told you before, you can go in front of a seller, and if you're honest, you can say, I know enough to know that I can solve your problem, but I don't know 100% of what I need to do here. But I got a guy that I know, my partner or my buddy, and I'm going to bring him in on this, And so to have people you can fall back on, and I had just joined my mentorship there. The Sub2 mentorship, and there's a lot of people in that Sub2 group that are that'll help you at a drop of a dime. You can call so many people up and get your guidance of what you need to know, And so I had the confidence to go in and say, I can solve this problem in my head. I can solve this problem, but I've got people I can lean on that'll help me do it. So he was just the owner. The guy was just like, the husband said, just take over my payments. Just take over my payments, I'll be good.
Yeah.
Good. So I ended up taking over control of the home through a Sub2. So the debt stays in his name, but the mortgage and the deed, the title's in my name.
Yeah.
So I can now I have control of the property. I ended up selling that house to another home buyer on contract who could not qualify for a loan through a traditional bank. And so the rent that the price that they're paying, their payment each month on the note that I made with them is going to be the same amount that they were making at the apartment that they lived in at the time, pretty much. So for that, they were getting a 5-bedroom house, and it was a flip. It had just been remodeled. So it was a heck of a deal. So that individual came in, paid us, I think $15,000 down on the property, and then just took over the payments. And so by assigning that deal to an end buyer that came in, we made $15,000 off the deal. She made the payments. The guy, I still talk to him 3 years later. He's always happy to hear when I call. We'll talk about where he's at now in life. Just give him a heads up. Everything's still rolling smooth because my name's behind that. So I always try to make sure everything still clicks.
Right.
Yeah. So that's an instance where there was zero equity. There's no way you're giving a guy a cash deal, 70% of the, ARV, blah, 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 run your formula. It's just not going to work.
Right.
But in that scenario, you're able to take over the payments and
tons of questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, so how much? No equity, right?
No equity.
How much do you have to put in? How much do you offer him? Because he's the one that has to offer, right? Like when you have that conversation with him, what terms was it on a sub-2? You were just taking over the payment. Was he asking you for any down payment?
Yeah. So he originally. So there was a lien against the house. There was a lien against the house for like $6,000 from the IRS.
Okay, that's another question. How did he deal with that?
So there's other people that will talk about negotiating down liens. In that case, we just paid it off. It was the ex-wife. It was her lien.
Okay, so you're bringing $6,000 into the table so far.
So when this deal started, the house was $155,000.
155. Okay.
They always say you should keep the houses because I think now it's worth like $250. So the new owners got themselves a deal. But it was 155. I might be a little off on my numbers. It was a while back, but it was 155 for the house. And he was like, listen, I just want the payments each month to be made because he was a couple months behind.
Yeah.
And the house was going to go into foreclosure. And so he was like, if you could just catch me up on the payments, which I think were at the time like $1,200 a month. And then he said, if you could pay off that lien for my ex-wife, that's what she wants, then we're golden. And then make my payments each month. So I think when it was all said and done, it was roughly $11,000 of money. So I'm looking at this house walking in. I need $11,000 at close. So what I've got to do is I've got to find an end buyer if I want to, wrap this thing out or assign it. I have to find an end buyer that's going to bring enough money. If I don't want to bring anything out of my pocket, I got to bring somebody that's going to have at least $11,000 put down towards this property.
Okay.
I was wrong. It wasn't 12,000 that she brought. It was 12,000 that we ended up pocketing when it was all said and done. They brought closer to 24 as their down payment. And then I just ended up making it to where it was an assignment. So her payment each month and how much she owes mirrors what's owed on the original note.
Okay.
So
so you're not cash flowing out of that?
I'm not cash flowing out of that one.
Why wouldn't you?
Because I made it to where, in order for me to assign that one off, I just made it to where the payment that she had to do each month was the exact amount of the house itself for the original seller.
Okay.
The numbers were a little tight for us to mark it up like we did in order to sell it.
Okay.
I didn't want to gouge anybody or make it to where it was irresponsible.
So technically, you're doing a favor. How are you benefiting from this transaction?
In that transaction,
just the money,
for me,
right?
it was much like a wholesale deal. It was an assignment, and I just took the money up front. Now, the last deal that we did was a deal in Florida, a town called Plant City. The individual had $155,000 that was still owed. The house was worth $155,000. He still owed around $125,000 on it, and he had roughly $23,000 worth of arrears that he had to owe on it. So he was losing credit each month. Well, he was paying $1,000 down on this house. He was supposed to be paying $1,000, so he was eating $1,000 each month on this home, all in. And then he quit making the payments because he was getting behind. So now he's got arrears. He's got his personal credit's getting a hit. He lives in another house like an hour and a half away. It used to be a rental. The individual that used to live in it died and just left all of his stuff. So the place, like there was food still on the counter from like 6 months prior. There was bug infestation, like there was issues with the home. He's not going to be able to rent this again. So he's got a dead rental that he can't manage. He lives an hour and a half away. He has a house. He does not have any need for the money that comes from that as a rental. And so he just wants the house gone. So what ended up playing out on that one is that in the end, he took $1,000 in his pocket to walk away from that house. We still owed roughly $21,000 in arrears on the property. So we needed $21,000 all in with everything, closing costs and whatnot, to close that deal out. So we ended up reselling that house to an end buyer. That person paid us $21,500 down as an initial payment. Mm-hmm. That covered what we owed on the original deal. Okay. So now we're in it for no money. Their payment each month on this property is roughly, when it's all said and done, $1,900 a month. The payment on the original mortgage is $1,000. So each month for 30 years, unless they sell it, there's a $900 cash flow from that property. Mm-hmm. And because the
and you're the holder of the note, right?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
And so then the end buyer also, the note that we made with them, that still has $194,000 to pay down off of it. Mm-hmm. The original note has 140, like 145.
Okay.
So maybe a little less, because in the end, there's roughly 60,000. I did calculate that. There's about $60,000 worth of equity
that you will be getting into that cash flow
at some point. Yeah, at some point, most likely they'll sell the house. Nobody lives in a house for 30 years, and when they sell that house and they pay off the note that they owe, there will be a $60,000 difference between paying off the original mortgage.
Okay,
so that's sense. Like money you're just going to sit on for later on down the line. You most likely will make that money, and then until they sell it, it's $900 a month cash flow.
And you don't have to do anything with the property.
That's the nice thing I like about these deals is they have to have insurance on it. They're responsible for any maintenance, upgrades, upkeep. You're
the lender.
Repairs. You're just the bank.
Yeah.
And so as that gets paid down, it's improving the credit rating of the guy that had the trouble originally. We paid off all the arrears, so he gets the benefit on his credit. Okay. And at some point, I think it was 5 or 7 years, he said he's going to want to retire. He's going to need to get a loan so he can, buy a house down in Florida. So we're improving his credit over time. We're paying down this house. 2 people that could not qualify for a house otherwise have a new home.
Yeah.
So everybody wins.
So now with the titles and companies, can you walk me through that process, or like how are the contracts different from your conventional route?
From a wholesale deal?
For example.
So and I use a transaction coordinator for a lot of my stuff. Okay. I advise people to do that there's a lot of people that self-perform on this stuff. I use a transaction coordinator. It costs me about $1,000 a deal to do that. And they are the ones that walk through all the paperwork that's needed, and they deal with any of the hassle between the title company, answering any questions from the sellers and the buyers. They basically will step in and make sure that the paperwork flows like it should.
Question.
Yeah.
So when you're doing those closing costs and titles, and you're having this lady do that, all of that for you, are you using local companies with respect to where the property is?
Yeah, so largely we do that. Sometimes we've tried a few nationwide type of companies, but I found they're less responsive. They're less. There's some deals where we almost lost them because it's a week before close, and you call them and you're like, "Hey, just trying to make sure everything's still going like it should be, that it's everything's flowing." And it's like, "Well, I called the seller and they didn't answer me." I was like, "Well, how many times you call them?" "Well, I was busy. I only called them once." Like, "Did you text them?" Because they, well, no, I didn't do that. And it's been 3 days. You know what I mean? So
okay, not worth your time.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So we usually will use a local title agency and find somebody around that's favorable.
Okay. And that is so no national but local. So do you have to educate yourself in the law with regards to how you put offers in different states?
So I guess I might have to if I was in. I know that there's different laws pertaining to some of the stuff in Texas, and I know that some people won't do certain types of transactions in California or Illinois, and I might be wrong, but it's just the states. I know the laws of the states that I operate in,
Yeah.
and so largely now it's Florida. We used to do nationwide at time. I think we might get back to that again.
Yeah.
Most of my stuff that I do now is either in Kansas City, in Missouri, or it's down in the Tampa into the Orlando Northeast into Daytona Beach,
Gotcha.
Lucia County. Yeah.
So you do know your stuff pretty much.
Yeah, and and this is again me not being a legal expert on things. I think that I don't think that there's a large range of difference between the laws across a lot of different states. They might call different contracts or different executory items different names, but the concept and the process is largely the same. And I don't really worry about it because, again, this is where I enjoy being in a mentorship is I know I have dozens of people in any given state where I can just, at the drop of a hat, reach out and just say, hey, man, I got a deal in this state. Do you recommend me a title company? Do you know anything I should look out for?
You may even partner with them, right?
Yeah, I might partner with them on helping me with, you got a buyer. Do you want it? And so, again, I think I might be a little more loose with my approach to stuff because I know that I have the comfort of knowing I have smarter people than me or people that are more local and have more knowledge on that area that I can always fall back on.
I feel like you can always boil it down to network. Your network is big.
Always. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my life, especially in real estate is, and I have to change my thinking about this, I think, is because I've always been I'm going to do what I need to do. If I need help, I'll reach out. Yeah. And if you need help, reach out to me. And I don't think you're taking advantage of me in any way. It's just, do your thing. And then if you need something and I can provide it, just ask, and I take that approach to other people. And I don't do well with what I think are superficial relationships. And I still don't know how some people with, a Rolodex, you probably don't know what a Rolodex is, people with a network that's, just forever deep on Facebook or something, I don't know how you get to those deeper relationships long term. All my relationships with people that I consider friends are people that I could fall back on for multiple things. They're deep relationships.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, and now with the Sub2, talk to wrap this up, and I want to know more about the strategies that you're using, that you're learning, like anything that you think, oh, this is really cool. Because I know we already mentioned the RAB, right?
Yeah.
We have mentioned a Sub2.
Yeah. So I just think the concept in general of being able to get into houses with no money out of your pocket is not just something that goes with wholesaling. It's also with Sub2. So, you can. There's so many ways to skin a cat too, and I've told you this when we were talking behind the scenes.
You certainly have.
You get someone and they tell somebody they can put you in an arm bar, and they're like, "I know jujitsu," and it's like, it goes a little bit further than that, right?
Yeah.
And so, I sometimes feel like I know more than usually the person I'm sitting next to on a bus about how to do Sub2 deals or wholesaling. But when you get into a room with guys, the gray hairs, the people that have been doing this for a long time, you start getting into the tax side of it. You start getting into notes. You get into all these issues with commercial. Just the difference. It feels like when I'm talking about it, I'm really just talking about how to do an arm bar, right? These guys, these are the real black belts. And so I think it's one of those subjects where when you dive into it, it's where you just start to realize you didn't really know what you didn't know. There's so much out there, and there's no way between now and the day I die I'm going to know it all. And so I just think the idea of there's multiple exit strategies. I think that's one of the things that kind of blew me away. The different ways that you can part with a property, whether it's lease option, assigning it to someone on a lease option through a Sub2 deal, which is largely, I guess you would call it in a way, subletting, a similar concept. Selling it on a wrap where you just assign you sell the house to another individual that pays you more for the house for the option of being able to finally the opportunity to be able to buy a house. Airbnbs, using them as short-term to mid-term rentals for construction workers or nurses, or executive rentals, doing halfway houses, rehab centers. I know that's a huge push that a lot of people are going through now, finding houses that have multiple bedrooms that are in a maybe a B to C neighborhood, and using those for making contracts with people that have rehabilitation programs. Crash pads for pilots. People don't know a lot about those. You got houses that are near the airport where they'll stick 15 bunk beds into 2 different rooms, charge those people $300 a month, and they are just able to have 24-hour access to that because they have to sometimes show up and stay the night till they find out when their next flight is for stewardesses and pilots. There's just so many different ways that you can find an opportunity once you gain control of the house and the mortgage and the payments to just try to find a way to make more each month than you're paying so that you can profit.
Yeah. I'm going to throw a couple words at you, and I want you to give me your first thoughts in a couple of sentences. Dual and sell clause.
Okay. So, it's a mirage, I would say. And I don't want to say it doesn't happen. And knock on wood, it's not been something I've had to deal with, but from a lot of people that I have that have gone through it, again, not a lawyer, there's multiple ways to deal with the due on sale clause. A lot of times, contacting the bank and talking to them about the fact that the payments have been made and just going through like, the payments have been made. There's no guarantee of what the condition of this house is once you take it back. There might be money that you're going to have to put back into this house to even make it to where you can resell it for value. And a lot of times just through that negotiation with the people that are at the bank can assuage that. Another way is to just deed the house back to the original seller. And so that takes away the fact that you've taken over the title. And then basically you're buying it on a contract from them.
Yeah.
So there's ways to get away from the due on sale. I know that a lot of people just immediately will jump on that and say, the due on sale. But a lot of times also it's like, can you name anybody people that do this? Can you name anybody that's gone through that? And there's more of a struggle there.
Yeah. Multifamily.
Multifamily? In what way?
Just first thing comes to your mind. Okay,
so to be honest with you, first thing that comes to my mind, because I've always regretted this, multifamily would be my first step. I think that if I was to start this all over again, I would have house hacked a fourplex with an FHA loan and built that out as my base for my equity and my cash flow. And then it's kind of like poker. You don't want to play with scared money, right? And I've been there. So I guess I could go down that. I've not officially with a lawyer, but I've bankrupted myself probably 4 times in my life.
Whoa.
Because of my risk aversion. And either I've gone in on a deal where I didn't, and this is stuff that I've learned from, but just going all in on a project when you didn't know the people you were partnering with, going in on a deal where you didn't understand the property itself, like Arizona, getting some success and then burning through your cash faster than you're making it because you think that now you know enough that you can expand and hire a team and put in money to systems and programs and software, and next thing you know, it's like things are tight and you've got to let people go. I've been there.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the benefits, a lot of people want to leave their W-2s, and I was that guy, and my W-2 ended in May of last year. A lot of people want to jump straight in, and but that having that security of cash flow allows you to be smarter with your decision making. You're not acting out of desperation or on an emotional response,
Yeah.
And so I think that would be, if I was to do it all over again, I would have gone through a fourplex. I would have got the cash flow. Now you've got something that can support you. Now you can make rational decisions. Doesn't mean you have to overthink everything, but you could at least put something through your head before you act on it,
Yeah. How old are you?
44.
Okay, that's almost 20 years of experience telling you exactly what to do. And from literally, most people that I meet, they always tell me the same story. So it's got to be true. Every single investor tells me the same
What's
thing.
that?
just house hack into a duplex if you can, triplex, fourplex, do it all over again, right? Build that equity, build that cash flow.
And I think, God, now I'm not like some wise old owl on a branch, but like I've been through so much, I think in my time, I've lived a lot of life, I think. And one thing that I would always caution against also is feeling as though there's a balance between not sitting on your ass all day and thinking I've got forever because I'm only 20. But you always have this thing creeping in your mind of like, I'm wasting time. There's not enough time. I need to, and man, it's like that whole thing. Like if I would have just taken a step each day, I'd be 500 miles right now. Right. And so this feeling of like, you're not succeeding because you're not at this goal that you had, that you put in place, that you had in front of you. The success is it's corny, but it's that success is in the journey type of deal, is like, realize you have more time than you think to reach your goal, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I still have to remind myself of that daily, is that I'm one of those people that's just constantly feeling like I'm not getting enough done, or I'm not where I should be by now. Right. And you have to balance that. You have to have a healthy view of the amount of time you've got and how you're using it. Does that make sense?
100%. I can 100% can relate with you. I feel like I'm wasting my time every day. I'm not doing something.
Yeah. And I mean, and make sure that it's productive, that it's not just, and that's another thing that I have is I'll catch myself sometimes just doing stuff. And then when I step back on it, it's like, you're just doing something so that you can say you didn't sit still, and like, make sure that you plan your day out so that when you get done doing something, you knew that it was getting you to that next place that you want to get to. Make sure that step that you've got take your larger step, break it down into smaller steps, and then break those down into smaller steps, and then use that as your plan to get forward. Just make sure that you've talked to somebody that's been through it or that's smarter than you, that can make sure that your next step is correct. And that way you're planning out what actions you're taking, and you're not just spinning your wheels.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's common sense, but I know that I misstepped on that for probably 10 years at least. And I know at times I'll catch myself still doing it.
Wow. That's good stuff, because I thought I was the only one that I figure everybody has their own battles and their own things that they're going through, but I can totally relate with that. Guys, if you made it this far, you want to learn more about Sub2, leave it in the comments. We'll have him again explain to us how he did the rap one more time for the people that don't get it.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. If it was a little, sometimes you're just going through it in your head and it's like,
we'll have a whiteboard.
I should whiteboard it out.
Yeah, it'll make a lot more sense.
And if you have anybody that's watching, I guess the one area where I provide value is where Sub2 helped me is that there's wholesale deals out there where the cash offer doesn't work, but the motivation is there. And we didn't get into any of that as far as how you go about finding your sellers and like what you should look for on those calls and the way that you should structure the approach to those individuals. And so if you know that the motivation is there, you just can't quite make that cash work because the house is in a good condition or they have a money focus. Creative finance and Sub2 sometimes is the way to get that deal across the line. And so if you know anybody that has knowledge on this, or if you reach out, I'd be glad to help. That's probably where the biggest value comes from it.
Cool. Yeah, we'll have you again because we didn't touch on that at all.
Yeah. I feel like we went an inch deep on everything. And so it's, I'd be happy to do that.
If you made it this far, please like and subscribe, hit the like button. Said that twice. Do it right now. And I'll see you guys on the next one.